I adore pumpkin. I love baking with it. I love the warm spices that you put into it. And so we're gonna make a quick bread made with pumpkin and all of the pumpkin pie spices that everybody loves. In this chapter, I'm gonna bake my favorite pumpkin bread with spices, and I'm gonna do it in a 9 by 13 inch pan so that we have nice little bars of our quick bread. It's just a perfect snack, so let's get into it. First thing we wanna do is roast our pumpkin. So in order to roast a pumpkin, you just need to cut it in half. I'm using a big cleaver, but you don't have to. You can just use a chef's knife like this. Something that has a little bit of heft to it will help get through it, but that's it. We're just cutting the pumpkin in half. You wanna get yourself a cutting board. Now, don't forget, you can always use pumpkin puree. You don't have to roast your own pumpkin, but this is really fun. So I highly recommend you try it. Okay, so I'm just gonna take my cleaver and I'm just going to jam into it. You can't be tentative. You have to really go for it. There we go. And then I'll just lift the pumpkin up and keep cutting it. Get the knife through there. This is kind of a big one, but. So I'm just letting the knife work its way in until I get all the way through. So just sort of tapping it on the counter. Once I'm through there we go. And I get all the way through. I'm not even gonna worry about the seeds. I'm just gonna keep them right in there because once it's roasted, they'll just slip right out. So I just put it cut side down on a sheet tray, just like so. And I have some parchment under there just to make cleanup easier. And then into the oven. I have my oven set to 350 degrees. The baking time will totally depend on the size of the pumpkin. And so I would say in about a half an hour, we're gonna come back and all we're gonna do is press down on the top of our pumpkin. And if it's soft, it's ready to go. So 30 minutes, 350 degrees, and our pumpkin should be roasted. I'm gonna bake this quick bread in a cake pan, a 9 by 13 inch cake pan, and that's gonna give me lovely little pumpkin bars. I just think it's a nice alternative to a loaf pan. The way that I'm gonna prep this is just a bunch of butter. I like to use butter because it's gonna become part of the recipe with the pumpkin spice quick bread baking in the pan. You can absolutely use a baking spray. I just prefer to use butter because I love the taste of butter, and I figure everything in the pan should be delicious. So a nice, generous coat of butter. I'm not going to put parchment in here because typically you just want to serve it straight out of the pan. It's just the easiest way to go. This is going to be quick. This is going to be easy. Okay, so my pan is all ready to go. And now I'm going to chop up the nuts for the quick bread. The nuts are optional. I have one son who adores them and one son who won't eat anything with nuts. Today we're gonna add pecans to it. You could do walnuts, you could do almonds, you could do anything you want. Let me get a chopping board. And I want these to be fairly small pieces. You don't want them tiny. That you can sort of play with too, because they're gonna add a texture to your cake. I think this is good, sort of like a rough chop of the nuts. Okay, that looks great. So the next thing that I wanna do is mix up my spices. I'm gonna make my own pumpkin pie spice. Mine is a little bit different in that I'm using a touch of cocoa powder because the way that I'm swirling this into our quick bread batter, I want it to be really noticeable, and just a touch of cocoa powder will give it that pop, that visual pop that we want. So I have cocoa powder, I have cinnamon, I have ground ginger, and ground clove. I'm also using fresh nutmeg. You can absolutely use store-bought ground spices, but they're not gonna be as intense. If you grind the spice right before you use it, you're gonna get this amazing smell to it, all of the oils from it, and so it's just a more intense flavor. All you need to do that is a coffee grinder, cleaned out coffee grinder so there's no coffee in there. And then your spices. So I'm gonna grind up our whole cloves. These are very intense. Oh, they smell incredible. And then we're just gonna grind that up. I usually grind, a little bit extra, and then if I have more than the recipe calls for, I just store it in a glass container. And that will last for at least a couple of weeks. And it will still have the intensity of the aroma and all of the oils from the spice. And then just grind it, let it go. Okay. So this is what we're going for. It should be nice and powdery. And then we're just gonna mix them together. I'm using a big bowl because we're going to be adding a little bit of our quick bread batter to this spice blend before we swirl it into the final batch. Okay, and then the last thing is my fresh nutmeg, and we're just gonna grate our nutmeg. It's so much fun to play with all of these spices in their natural state, and the smell and the flavor really makes it worth it. Our pumpkin's been roasting for half an hour, so we're gonna check it out. It smells just absolutely terrific. And see that? When you poke it, it's soft, so it's done. That's it. You can even see the juices sort of came out of it and they caramelized, and that's where all the flavor is gonna be. While it's still warm, I'm just gonna flip the pumpkin over and get the seeds out. And when the pumpkin is hot, that just scoops out super easily. So you don't have to fight with it. When it's fresh, before it's roasted, they kind of put up a fight. So this is just super slick and easy. And I just want to get all of that out, all those sort of fibrous bits in there and the seeds. I don't want that to go into my puree, so I'm just gonna scoop it all out. But that's it. And now we need to get the flesh out of the pumpkin, and we'll puree it, and then we'll be ready to make our quick bread. I like to do this in a food processor, and that just makes it so much easier. You could also do it with a hand blender, or a food mill would work as well. So we'll just scoop the hot pumpkin into our food processor. Look at that. Oh, it just smells so good. You can see here how all of the juices that came out of there caramelized. And so it just makes for a much sweeter, more intense flavor of your pumpkin. Okay, so that looks about done. And now we're ready to puree the pumpkin. And that looks pretty good. And so I'm going to weigh that out. So we're going for 15 ounces of our puree. There we go, 15 ounces. And we have about 1 3/4 cups of the puree. and off we go. So what I'm gonna start out with is my oil right into our bowl. And to that, I'm going to add our brown sugar. Always cover so it stays nice and soft. Right into our bowl, our granulated sugar goes in. Our eggs, 3 eggs, right in there. Just like so. And our evaporated milk. I am using evaporated milk. You could just use whole milk, but the evaporated milk gives it this sort of deeper flavor because it almost has like a caramelized flavor when they evaporate the milk. It's a little bit thicker. You could use whole milk, but it'll change the flavor just a touch. Okay, that goes in. And then I'm just gonna whisk together all of my wet ingredients until it's nice and smooth, super simple. Then what I want to do is mix together my dry ingredients before I add them. I want my dry ingredients all to be mixed together. I want my leavener and my salt to be well combined with it, and then I can mix it with the wet. So I have baking soda goes into the all-purpose flour along with the salt. I'm adding my whole wheat flour to it as well. It's a little bit healthier, and I'm just gonna blend those together to make sure that the baking soda and the salt are well distributed. And that will also ensure that this is going to rise evenly in the oven. So that looks great. Before we add that to our wet ingredients, I'm just gonna add our warm pumpkin. I don't wanna add it too hot, but it's been cooled down enough that I can add it and it'll be fine. Okay, so into our bowl goes our beautiful pumpkin. I wanna make sure that I don't leave any of it in our measuring cup. I want it all in our recipe. Into our bowl. And then whisk that together, and then in goes our dry ingredients. And I'm just gonna toss that in. If you have a wide whisk, you can use that, or you can use your rubber spatula as well. Before I pour the batter into the cake pan, I'm going to pour 1/4 of that batter into the bowl with the spices. So in it goes. Okay, and then I'm gonna mix this together. So the reason that I'm doing this, adding the little bit of my batter to my spice mix, is because this is what's gonna give the quick bread the swirly look and the little infusion of the spiced flavors. So I'm gonna set this aside, put the rest of the batter into the cake pan. I'm going to sprinkle the nuts on top. Again, the nuts are totally optional. I'm gonna add our spice layer. I'm not gonna just dump it in. I'm going to drizzle it over the top in a line, just like so, all the way across the top of our quick bread. And we're just going to keep drizzling this on the top here until we've used it all up, going all the way to the end so that each bite is gonna end up with spice. This is the fun part. You just need a butter knife like this, and we're gonna take our butter knife and we're gonna just drag it through the layers of the cake, back and forth, just like this, and create a marbleized pattern in our batter. And now we need to get it into the oven. So once you have the pumpkin batter and your spice infused batter all swirled together, then it's time to go in the oven. I have my oven set for 350 degrees. The rack's in the middle, and we're gonna let this bake for about 30 minutes. I smell the spices. I smell the pumpkin. Our cake is almost ready. I just need to check it. So get my skewer to make sure that the inside is completely baked. But let's see what we've got. It's so pretty. Look at the design that we put on the top is still there. It feels like it should be done, but this is the ultimate test. So straight down into the cake and yep, clean. So we are ready to roll. Look at that. What a gorgeous quick bread with the spice and the pumpkin and the nuts. It's just gonna be fantastic. So we just need to let this cool off a little bit before we cut into it, but it's so pretty. I'm so pleased. It's almost too pretty to cut into, but I always manage to. So let's taste it. It's still warm. Oh, it's nice and tender. Because we put so much butter on that pan, it just slips right out. You have the pumpkin batter and then that spice swirl in there so that every bite is gonna have the pumpkin and the contrast of the spice and then the bits of nuts on the top, and it's warm and oh, it just looks great. Let's try it. That is absolutely delicious. That like warm sort of winter flavors of the spice and the pumpkin. It's absolutely dynamite. I'd say that's like a gift cake. Like you should like bring a piece of this to all of your neighbors and they will just absolutely love you. It's so good. In this chapter, we learned how to make my pumpkin bread recipe. We learned all about pumpkins, roasting pumpkins so that you get a deep flavor. We also swirled in the spices so that you get the spices, but you have like this intense pumpkin flavor and then the spices so that they're sort of layered together. And it's just a really fun way to make quick breads. So enjoy.